I became a graphic designer almost by accident. Ever since I was a little child, I really liked drawing, doodling, crafting little Christmas postcards, and choreographing dance routines. However, when it came to school, none of the subjects really stood out to me that much. We did have art class, but nobody really took it seriously, so I didn't enjoy it either. I liked English, but I didn't really want to become an English teacher or writer. So one day, my mom had an idea to put me in art and music school. It wasn't a school, it was more like an after-school activity where you can learn an instrument or just practice art. I was a bit hesitant at first, but I was also a child, so what do I know? The first few months were a bit awkward. I wasn't really good at anything, and oftentimes I looked over my peers' work and I was like, damn, that's good, and I'm not doing that good. We also had Photoshop classes, and this was my first Photoshop. Needless to say, I did get a not so good grade, and so Photoshop and I started on the wrong foot. After a couple months, I started to enjoy being there, and I was getting better. The art school program in general lasts about 6 years, but since I joined when I was older, I only was there, I think, for 4 years. 2 years later, I'm 18, and I feel pretty pessimistic about the world because now I have to figure out what the hell am I supposed to do after high school. It was not so obvious at first because I don't want to be an artist. When people think of artists, they think of painters that can barely make their ends meet. So somehow my mom helped me find a university, and that was the only university program I applied to, which was basically the digital art program. Their pitch was making art while also making money, and somehow I got accepted. In the program, I learned a little bit about a lot of things, like video editing, graphic design, animation, illustration, coding, 3D, and the list goes on. To be honest, I really enjoyed my education. The first 2 years you learn a lot of things, and then the next 2 years you have group projects and internships, and you decide on what you want to specialize in. And I chose graphic design because I really liked what graphic designers do, and so I made a portfolio that reflects those skills. So why do I regret becoming a graphic designer? I think there's a lot of aspects of this job and the world right now that I would like to talk about. The job market sucks, and it's been sucking for a long time. To be fair, I was trying to find a job abroad, which is a little bit harder, but I think this is a global thing. Many of my friends are struggling to find jobs, no matter where they are, what their experience is, and if they're a graphic designer or an engineer. After finishing my studies and having 3 internships in my resume, I have applied to many jobs over the past 2 years, and the majority of positive replies I receive are only from unpaid internships. At this point, I was just looking for a full-time job. I think right now it's even difficult to get a minimum wage job if you don't know a friend of a friend that knows the owner. I also had a couple of mentors looking through my portfolio and suggesting some small changes, but some of them were quite surprised that I didn't have a job yet. But to be honest, now I think I understand why, because when I look through my friends' portfolios, I have the same thought. Their portfolios might even look better than mine, and yet they still don't have a job. Then the jobs just suck. There are many types of graphic designers: web designer, advertising and marketing designer, illustrator, package designer, UX UI designer, motion and graphic animation designer, and the list goes on. And you can also combine them. For example, right now I would say, based on my skills, I'm an advertising and marketing designer plus illustrator. But now it feels like some companies want you to know all of this and still pay you the bare minimum they can. I've seen many job postings like this, and even if I fit 100% of the requirements, I still get emails saying that there were just too many applicants and we did not choose you as one of the candidates that moves forward. I've also applied to job postings where only 80% of the requirements I meet, but I still get rejection emails or no emails at all. Granted, some of these companies probably are just throwing a net and seeing what they can catch because they probably don't really know what they want themselves. So there's a clear shift into multidisciplinary designers, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can create high expectations in these creative fields, and some of the expectations might be also unrealistic. Especially if the pay doesn't really reflect your skills anymore. A graphic designer can be a web developer and a videographer and a photographer and a video editor and an animator at the same time. But a generalist like this might not bring the same level of expertise like a specialist would. Plus, they are at higher risk for burnout because they're juggling multiple jobs while getting the same pay. Plus, this also impacts entry-level designers because if you see a long list of requirements, they might be discouraged to apply even though they could grow into the role. Another aspect of this is that there might be just too many of us, which I'm also going to discuss in the next point, which is graphic design is often misunderstood. I think a lot of people think that graphic design is an easy job. Don't get me wrong, being a doctor or a lawyer or a firefighter is probably way more difficult than being a graphic designer. But there are many things that people don't really understand about this role. I think often people think that graphic design is just drawing and playing with colors, assuming it's just fun and requires no technical skill or effort. Non-designers may not realize the depth of work that is involved in understanding branding, composition, user experience, typography, and so on. And I believe because of this, in many of my previous job experiences, I wasn't really treated like an expert. I didn't feel like I was valued based on my knowledge and previous experience, even though I was the only designer there. Out of the 7 previous design jobs I had, which some of them were full-time, part-time, and freelance gigs, 4 of those jobs didn't make me feel like I was a valued team member. If you're curious about the rest of them, one of the jobs I had told me to do whatever I want, which was pretty cool, but then I also didn't really get like a please or a thank you, which made me a little bit unappreciated. The 2 other jobs had like strict branding guidelines, which again is not a bad thing, but I was more feeling like a design machine rather than, a creative. And don't get me wrong, I still have a lot of space to grow and develop my skills. But in most of these cases, I was the only designer. And as an example, if someone studied game development, you would assume and trust them to make you a game. But for some reason, it doesn't really work when it comes to design. I think the reason why some people don't see graphic designers as experts is because, in some ways, design is subjective. And so at my 2 previous job positions where I was the only designer, I would design something and then the upper management would criticize it, saying that they don't like it and can you make it fresh and sexy? Which I don't even know what that means. In these 2 situations, even if I explain my reasoning of why I did something a certain way, they would just not listen. And why I say design is partially subjective is because design is not art. And this is something that I personally needed to learn. I mean, back in the day, I did know graphic design is not the same, but I didn't fully understand what they do. At the time, I thought when they're given a task, for example, design a branding for a cafe, they would design it to the best of their abilities, they would get paid, and job is done. To be a graphic designer, art skills are not necessary, but they are beneficial. However, there are many rules when it comes to graphic design that we learn and practice, such as alignment and contrast and color theory and text hierarchy, and making the font readable, making a composition balanced, creating consistency, and the list goes on. And overall, the graphic designer's job is not about being creative, it's more about communication and problem solving, and some of it can be in a creative way. But I also understand, in a way, if, for example, you go to a hairdresser and they cut your hair and you don't really like it. It is your hair, so you would like it to look good for you. It doesn't matter that everybody thinks that the middle part is cool, you really prefer the side part. And that's your choice. All I'm trying to say is that I would just like to be treated with respect and appreciation for my knowledge and expertise and be paid fairly for what I know and my work. The most disrespected I ever felt when being a graphic designer was in my previous job position. They told me to design a couple social media posts, and I did, and it was the end of the workday, so I shut my laptop and went and did other things. The next day I come back, I open my laptop, and I look at the designs, and they're changed. Someone changed my designs, and they look bad. And it's not just me that thought they look bad. A lot of other people thought they look bad. So what happened is that because the designs were made in Figma, which is like a software that you can share with a lot of people, the upper management decided instead of giving me constructive feedback and talking to me about the designs, they just gonna do it themselves. And they told me that they like these better, so I should do it like this. And let me tell you, it did not feel nice. It's like you make a soup that you really like, and then someone's like, I actually hate potatoes, and let's add some pickles to it, and make it super peppery. And then you come back and you're like, what happened to my soup? I was incredibly frustrated, because it was also incredibly unprofessional. In retrospect, I understand now that they just wanted the text to be the more prominent feature of the image, but they didn't really have the skills of communicating that. And while the company, I think, disrespected everybody in some kind of way because there was a lot of micromanaging and the whole company was just kind of disorganized. So needless to say, I didn't stay there for that long. Just treat people with respect. That's all I'm asking for. I think what's making graphic design more misunderstood is the rise of tools like Canva and AI. And I want to talk about those things as well. First up, Canva. Personally, I don't really like using Canva. However, I think it is a great tool for beginners. It's free, it's user-friendly, and it has many useful features. When I feel lazy and I don't feel like animating something, I do go to Canva for that. And I feel like with Canva now anybody can be a graphic designer. I guess the same thing happened with photography. Now everybody has a really good camera on their phone, so anybody is a photographer. Which is not entirely true, because not only do photographers use fancy cameras, but they're very skilled in lighting, composition, and post-production, so it's way more than on the surface. And the same applies for design. When it comes to tools, I use Adobe. These are the industry standards, and these are the tools I learned first. But the thing is, Adobe is also not that great. And since we're here, let's talk about that as well. Because Adobe fully dominates this industry, the tools are absurdly expensive. It's $60 a month, which seems like a decently reasonable price because you get all the Adobe tools. But what if you just want Photoshop? I would assume it's like $5 a month. Well, it's $22 a month, which is a lot. And if you want Photoshop and Premiere, it's $44 a month. So might as well just pay 60 euros a month and get all of the tools. Plus the software is not even perfect. They crash without giving you an explanation. And shortcuts don't really make any sense, because even though it's the same tool in different softwares, they use different shortcuts. Why? Why not make it cohesive? And Adobe has been in a couple controversies lately. First one is the uncancelable subscription. Apparently in the US it's almost impossible to unsubscribe from Adobe. I think now there's been a lawsuit, perhaps, about that. But there were crazy things that you had to do to actually cancel paying 60 euros a month. And personally, I had Adobe from work and I had to cancel it, and I just couldn't figure out how to do it. I kept Googling how to cancel Adobe, but I just couldn't find the answer. One of the answers was to call customer support, which is like, what do you mean? Can't you just have a little button saying cancel and that's it? It's so bizarre. The second controversy is about AI. Adobe was updating their terms of service, which said that they can now take your local files to train their generative AI. People were furious, confused, and felt betrayed, and then soon after Adobe said that there was a big misunderstanding and that they did not want to do that. But I think the global consensus is that if they could have done it without getting caught, they probably would. But Adobe also has Adobe Stocks, where you can find images and illustrations made by other artists. And as a user, you could download these images or illustrations and they probably get some kind of small cut of the fact that their work is being used. But now, from my understanding, the people that submitted stuff there and the submissions of the future will be used to generate their AI. Which also leads to Adobe Stocks just being filled with AI junk that looks kind of bad because it's AI. To be honest, I do love Adobe tools, but it's so sad to see it just not love us. I have looked into alternatives, but I don't think they're as good as Adobe ones. In defense of Adobe, Photoshop is like an ocean that you can keep going down to. There are so many features and things that you can do with it that I'm not even aware of. One moment it feels like I know Photoshop pretty well, but then I look at a tutorial and I'm like, what are these features I've never seen before? It's like I'm unlocking a new area in a video game. But to be fair, I feel like they're probably gonna appear someday. Now I want to talk about AI. I think in general AI is a great tool for creators. But to me, it seems like companies are eager to replace designers and artists with AI. But can AI fully replace them? I think the answer is yes and no. It depends on what kind of outcome you're looking for. I feel like right now, most of the time, you can tell when something is made by AI. Not only does it make a weird uncanny valley mistake, but it looks super shiny and detailed, and yet when you look into the details, they don't really make much sense. And yet, at my previous job, I had to make a lot of shitty looking ads. Like the ones you get when you use Duolingo and it's promoting some kind of game app or how to make more money app, those type of ads. Kind of bad quality, I really didn't enjoy making them, and we also had to translate them into 7 different languages. So it was a pain to make, and I really didn't like them, so I would gladly give this job to AI. But what about when it comes to creating innovative and original designs? Even if AI will be capable of original work, due to the fact that it can analyze vast amounts of data that maybe humans can just simply overlook, AI will lack emotional and cultural context that humans can bring to the table. So I think AI cannot replace humans and designers and creatives. It can be a great tool if you use it correctly, and it maybe can eliminate the work that doesn't really fulfill anybody. So after all this, do I regret choosing this career path? And the answer is no. Graphic designer jobs might be dying out in a way, and creatives I feel like are becoming more and more misunderstood because of the rise of AI and companies cutting costs. Even though this might sound weird and cheesy, but I feel like for me personally, creating things and being creative is something that I'm supposed to do. 8 years ago, I would have said that I don't want to be an artist, but maybe I already was and I just didn't know. Even though right now I'm not in the best place mentally and in life, I don't have my own place, I'm technically unemployed, and I'm living off of my savings. But also right now, I have the time to dedicate to my creative projects that I'm actually proud of. And as a creative, trying to carve my own path and see where it leads me. I never actually saw myself making YouTube videos, but now I'm here. I never saw myself developing a game, but I'm really happy that I am. I think no matter what career path I would have ended up taking, I would have tried to find ways to create things, be it directing blockbuster movies or just making silly paintings to decorate my room.